Could you ask the witness to come back, please? Okay. Right, Mrs. Brown?
Yeah.
Ready to carry on?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, Mr. Millett.
Ms. Brown, thank you for coming back to us. I'm going to continue on the theme of information which you saw or had on the night. And I'm going to ask you please next to turn to a document TMO 1003176, page 6. TMO 1003176, page 6. Now, this is an email of the 14th of June sent at 0603 to you, as well as Janice Ray and Nicola Bartholomew. And it comes from David Noble, as you can see, and it's entitled Subject Grenfell Emergency Plan Section. Do you see?
Yeah.
And just to familiarise you with this document, it's an email that runs over 3 pages. And has some information on it. So just cast your eye down it, you'll see that it's Grenfell Tower and the address, number of dwellings 120, approximate number of residents 330 to 360, indication of likely number of vulnerable witnesses 8 to 12, and then over the page, top of the page, information, just wait till you get there, over the page, page 7, information useful to the emergency services. Are basic plans available, and if so, are these attached? And then you can see some further details, and then at the bottom of the page, location of relevant keys in reception, ground floor. And then if we can turn the page again to page 8, please. Top of that page. You can see at the top, Ms. Brown, it says stairs exit at walkway level. Now, I've shown you this document, not completely, but parts of it. And I'm happy to show you more of it if you want me to make my questions clearer. But the first question I have is, do you remember asking David Noble to send you this information on the night?
I didn't.
Do you know why he sent it to you?
No.
Right.
I think probably he's just trying to be helpful, but I don't know.
Do you know where he got the information from?
No.
Did it appear to you to be in a format that was familiar?
It is a document that is attached to our out of hours procedure. It's part of that. I know that.
Right. Now, let's look at that. And what I want to show you is the TMO emergency plan, and I'll show you the first page. I'll just take it in stages. TMO 100 13898, page 1. And that says, as we can see, KCTMO emergency plan. Are you familiar with this document and what follows? And then if we turn to page 3, within that document, you can see that it has version 1, August 2004, revised in May 2009, May 2015, and February 2016. And then just looking, I don't think I'm going to be able to ask you to do this at any speed, but looking on, Do you know that this document is divided into two parts? Part 1, which is the emergency plan for TMO, and Part 2, which is property details.
Yeah.
On the
Yes.
night of the fire, were you familiar with that as the basic structure of this document?
Yeah.
You were. Right. Now I'm going to ask you to turn, please, to Part 2 within the section dealing with property details, and go, please, to page 145. And there we can see the details which are familiar from the email we were just looking at, Ms. Brown. Under the first heading, under Grenfell Tower, Lancaster West, fourth entry down, number of dwellings, 120.
Yeah.
Now, as at the night of the fire, did you know that that was wrong and that, in fact, the number of flats in that building was 129?
Yes, absolutely.
You did know that?
Yeah.
And does it also follow that you also would know that the number of vulnerable residents was unlikely to be 8 to 12?
Yeah, that was more likely to be reflected on our tenancy information that we discussed earlier.
Okay. Can I also take it that if you turn to page 146, you can see at the top of the page, other means of escape, stairs at exit walkway level. Is it right that there were, in fact, no stairs at exit at walkway level as at the night of the fire?
That's correct.
And then we can see halfway down this page that, in fact, this document was dated the 25th of February 2002.
This part of it is, yeah.
Yes. As at the night of the fire, did you know that this information about Grenfell Tower within the emergency plan was 15 and a half years out of date?
I didn't know that, but I did know that this information wasn't correct, and I didn't utilise it and we had already passed on the correct information to people, to the Layla and people who we were liaising on the day. So we didn't use this.
So, do I take it from that answer that or part of that answer, that when you received the email we looked at a minute ago with these details in it, you looked at it and realised it was out of date?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Was that the first time that you discovered that the property details for Grenfell Tower were out of date within the emergency plan?
Well, I hadn't looked at it, this part of it, for a while. I didn't realise it was out of date.
Who within the TMO has responsibility for keeping this document up to date?
Our health and safety team.
Who heads that?
It is headed by our executive director. Barbara Matthews.
Barbara Matthews.
Barbara Matthews is our executive director who had responsibility for health and safety team. And she obviously had a structure of staff working below her.
Did you regularly liaise in your role as head of housing, if I can use a shorthand, did you regularly liaise with Barbara Matthews about the details within the emergency plan for properties?
No, I didn't.
Did Barbara Matthews or anybody in her team ever seek updated details about properties for the purposes of keeping this emergency plan up to date?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Certainly. Did Barbara Matthews or anybody in her team ever come to you and ask for updated details about properties for the purposes of keeping this emergency plan up to date?
No.
How involved were you and your team in providing details which we find in this emergency plan?
We weren't.
Do you know where Barbara Matthews and her team would get the details about properties in order to insert them into the emergency plan?
They would be familiar with the works in general, and I believe that Janice Ray, who was our health and safety officer, would have had involvement with the familiarisation with the fire brigade and would have updated them on this information as it went along, as the changes to the building happened.
So the answer is Janice Ray, is this right? Was the link between Barbara Matthews' team?
Yeah.
Between the LFB and the TMO,
Yes.
Yes, but also within the TMO, was she the link between your team and Barbara Matthews' team?
She reported directly into Barbara Matthews.
I see. Okay. Have you any explanation as to why this emergency plan was 15 and a half years out of date for Grenfell Tower as at the night of the fire?
No, I haven't got an explanation, but I do know we gave the right details early in the morning of the numbers of properties.
At what point on the night did you discover that the detailed information for Grenfell Tower within the TMO's emergency plan was out of date?
I think it was after we had given the correct information.
Was it?
And that was quite early on. I remember that was one of the first questions: how many properties that we were asked. So we were given that correct information early on. So this is yes. Sorry.
Did it surprise you that David Noble was sending information that was 15 years out of date and did not reflect the refurbishment, as we can see, to the incident ground at that time?
So David Noble wasn't a member of the health and safety team. He wasn't. So I'm assuming that he was just looking for documents that may have assisted on the night. He was trying to do what he could.
Yeah, let me ask my question again. I don't think you answered it. Did it surprise you that David Noble was sending information to the incident ground about Grenfell Tower that was 15 years out of date?
Well, I'm not sure that he would have known that.
No, but did it surprise you that he was doing it?
It didn't. Well, I suppose it is surprising that we don't have a document that's up to date, but it didn't faze me because we'd already given the right information.
We can also see on page 145, if we just go back a page, please. I'll just wait again for the document to come up. Page 145, just back one page, please. You can see that there's a line that says information useful to the emergency services, and then underneath that, are basic plans available, and if so, are these attached? And that is also repeated verbatim in the email that David Noble sent to you. Did the fact that there was a gap or blank in the email about the attachment of plans trigger any thoughts in your head about whether plans were available at that stage?
I'm not sure. I can't remember the timing of what you've just shown me.
I just showed you an email that came from David Noble at 6:03 a.m.
6:03. I don't remember. I don't remember my thoughts on it, I'm afraid. I just quite quickly glanced at it and thought it's not accurate, and then didn't spend any more time on it.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice that Janice Ray was another recipient of this email?
No. I mean, I really didn't spend much time looking at the detail of all of these emails when I was trying to do really live, positive things to assist and running around everywhere. I didn't look at that. I thought, I know we've given the right information. I'm going to park that and get on with something that's really useful to do. I understand. Does it follow from that, then, that you didn't contact Janice Ray and say, Janice, I've just received these details from David Noble. They don't reflect the refurbishment. Can you please provide us with updated information? No, it didn't, because I think that's something that we could just deal with after. We had so much to deal with on the night that I wouldn't have. That wouldn't have been, in my thought process right there. Were you in contact with Janice Ray during the course of your attendance at the incident ground from your time of arrival until 8 o'clock? I'm sure I would have been at some point. I remember her. I spoke to so many people. I can't remember the details of all the calls that I made. I remember her sending us charges down for our phones, but I don't remember any specific conversations with her. I don't recall any at this stage, I'm afraid.
Right. What about the other recipient of this email, apart from you and Janice Ray, Nicola Bartholomew? Did you contact Nicola and say to her, Nicola, this information is out of date, can we get some up-to-date information, please?
No, because it wouldn't have been Nicola's role. Nicola reported to me. She was with me in the rest centres. So there wouldn't have been any value in doing that. And as I say, I know we'd given the right numbers of properties previously. And as far as I know, this document wasn't handed over to anyone. So we weren't passing on misinformation.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to the question of plans, did you notice that there were no plans attached to the email that David Noble was sending you?
No.
And I take it that it would then follow that you didn't then go back to David Noble and say, where are the plans?
No, for the reasons I could.
Now, can I ask you to go back, please, to your witness statement, paragraph 13. And this follows on from paragraph 12. I'd just like to have both paragraphs, 12 and 13, highlighted, if I can, please. Paragraph 12 we've looked at this morning, Ms. Brown, and that's all about information being requested by the LFB, and we've covered that. Paragraph 13, I'll come back to now for reasons which will become apparent, but that then is an example. You say, I recall by way of example a senior fire officer asking Graham and myself if he came out of the stairs on the 11th floor and turned left, what flat numbers would be there. I was able to telephone a TMO officer very familiar with the block, and information was provided. I was not involved in or aware of any strategic incident command issues or decisions.
Are you all right?
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, this paragraph brings back really horrible moments.
I'm sure. Just take a
Sorry,
moment.
I'll be fine.
No, just take a moment and you'll feel better.
Sorry, your question.
Well, Ms. Brown, I'll take this slowly and carefully. And I'm afraid I do have to ask you questions. And if it gets too much, we can stop and we can take a break. There's no rush. You've provided this as an example of LFB asking for information. Now, the first question is, can you remember where you were when this senior fire officer asked Graham and you this question?
Yeah, definitely. I was outside the command unit with Graham on Bowmore Road.
Do you remember even roughly what time that was?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't. It was a significant moment, but I don't know the time.
Now, let's take it slowly. You say it was a significant moment. What makes you say that?
Oh,
Should we just have a pause?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's important that you feel comfortable before you answer questions. Would you like to have a 5-minute break?
No, we need to do this.
Yes,
now.
all right, I understand that.
Okay, all right.
Well, then just take your time.
Okay, it's because the fire brigade, the man, whoever he was, I don't know who it was, he came out and he said to Graham and I, there are a number of bodies on the 11th floor, and we need to know what numbers are on that floor. I just remember the circumstances in which he was asking for the information. I knew it was really urgent, and I knew it had to be absolutely accurate. I was one of a number of really awful moments.
All right. Now,
Sorry.
it's okay. We can take this slowly. In terms of timing, I know you can't be accurate. But do you remember whether it was it was still dark or whether it was getting light or light?
I remember that Graham was there, obviously, and he was there 6:30, 7, so it was summer, it was probably light by then. I'm making assumptions, sorry, I don't know.
Did the fact that he was asking you these questions, I know it was very upsetting, but did the fact that he was asking you these questions about the layout of the 11th floor trigger any thoughts in your mind about whether they had had plans or hadn't had plans yet?
So in my mind, they already had plans, but when someone asks you a significant question like this, in the moment, you know, you're not asking them whether they already knew or didn't know. You're just trying to find the answer as quickly as you can because you know it's really important.
Right.
And that's what I did, and I didn't have any other thoughts about it than that, apart from the sheer horror of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you say it was a senior fire officer. Was it a male?
It was a male, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know who it was.
No, we may be able to do better. Now, I'm going to ask you about some evidence that's been given to the inquiry by a firefighter called Station Manager Peter Johnson. Does that name ring a bell to you?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. First of all, do you remember whether the firefighter you spoke to was wearing a red T-shirt?
Sorry, I don't.
Okay. He's given evidence to the inquiry, and for our record, it's the 5th of September 2018 at pages 104 to 107, and he told us that he specifically remembers going out and speaking to a lady at 7:30, and again after that to try to find out where the plans were. And he says that's later on at about 9:30. And
I don't
do you remember
remember
that?
Specifically being asked for plans at any stage. I don't remember that.
Right.
I remember this vividly, but I don't remember that.
Okay. And I'm not asking you to speculate, but given what you recall of the night, is it possible that the firefighter you spoke to was Peter Johnson, who, as well as asking you about the 11th floor, was also asking you about plans?
Okay, I mean, I don't know. In the back of my mind, as I've said previously, I knew that they had already been given plans and familiarisation visits.
Right.
So,
as you say,
not giving, I didn't give it any further thought. To be fair, because this was so important. There was a template down in Grenfell giving floor numbers, but what I did to make sure this was absolutely accurate was phone the officer who would have been really familiar with that and could have given the exact accurate information, because they were saying when you turn right, what's the specific, turn left, sorry.
yes.
What's the specific information?
Yes.
So I did that and gave the information, and
You said a moment ago there was a template down in Grenfell giving floor numbers. What are you referring to?
I thought that there was a what do you call can't think of the word.
All right, take a moment. Collect your thoughts.
Well, it's just floor numbers that would say what flats would be on which floor.
Okay.
I think that was on the ground floor.
Next to the lift?
Sorry?
Next to the lifts?
I can't remember specifically, but I just thought that was the case, that there was, information on the on the floors.
But you're referring to are you referring to a silver metal
yes, that's
grid
what I was
with,
thinking. Yes.
so if you went to a floor, it would have the flat
yeah,
numbers?
Yeah.
I follow. Now,
flat numbers on each floor.
All right. Now, going back to your statement at paragraph 13, you say you were able to telephone a TMO officer very familiar with the block, and information was provided. First of all, do you remember who you telephoned?
I phoned Nicola Bartholomew first, I think, and she got Janice Jones, who was the neighbourhood officer, to call me. So it was really quick. It was in quick time. Right.
So just to be clear, you phoned.
I think I phoned
Nicola Bartholomew, and then Janice Jones, is that right?
Janice Jones called me
Called
straight
you.
back and said, this is the information.
Yeah. Okay. So she called you. And Janice Jones, who is she? What does she do?
She was a neighbourhood officer for the area and would have been very familiar with the job.
Right. Was she on site or not?
Do you know, at that stage, I can't tell you whether she was or I can't remember. Right. I'm sorry.
And you say that the information was provided.
Yeah.
First of all, do you remember what information was provided?
I gave the flat numbers, but yes, I gave the flat numbers, but I can't tell you now what those flat numbers were.
Right. Okay.
I didn't write it down. I stood next to the person as I got the information and passed it on, I believe.
So this conversation with Janice Jones, were you still at the command unit?
Yes, it was all you know, live time, as I remember.
And Janice gave you, is this right, gave you the flat numbers on the telephone?
Yeah, and I passed it on.
To?
Well, I can't remember the name of the man.
But to that same fire officer?
That same person,
right.
Yeah, the same person who asked me the information.
Okay. Now, again, these are points of fine detail, but do you remember whether you spoke to that fire officer through the window of the command unit? Or
no, he was outside.
He was outside?
He came out and stood outside. He was definitely next to us.
So he came out from the command unit?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. He was a very tall man, if I remember.
Ah, right. Did he have a close-shaven head?
I couldn't be 100% sure, but it's slightly ringing bells.
It's not narrowing it down very much, but we know that Peter Johnson, we know what he looks like and we know what he was wearing at least slightly earlier in the night. And we're looking for a closely shaven man with a red T-shirt.
Right.
Does that ring a bell?
I think he didn't have much hair, and I think he was very tall. He was quite tall, but I'm not going to 100% say that is the case.
Did you have any estates services assistants on site with you during the night?
They were on the ground. Yeah, they were helping.
They were. Who were they? Or rather, sorry, what was their names? What were their names?
I'm sorry, it's completely gone. Who their names are? I should know this. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to them that I can't remember their names, but I just can't know.
All right, okay. It's not a memory test, this. It's just
no, I know.
Attempt to get...
But it's
the reason I'm asking you that question, Ms Brown, is because the emergency plan says itself that estates services assistants, ESAs, who've got local knowledge, should attend. And I'm just trying to see whether
they were there.
Yeah, whether they were there.
They would have been there, yes. I do remember the two, people who had local knowledge were there. They were part of Nicola's team at Lancaster West,
okay.
And they were there. I did see them, and they did bring me information during the course of the day.
Now, still on the subject of plans, Mike Rumble, who had taken over the principal lay-low role at or by 7 o'clock a.m., says that he asked you for plans after a meeting which began at 7:10 and finished 15 or so minutes after that. Do you recall having a discussion with Mike Rumble about plans at around that time?
No, I don't. I think Graham would have been with me at that stage. I don't specifically remember that.
Do you remember being asked to provide an electoral roll?
No.
Or at least assist in the obtaining of an electoral roll?
No.
No. Do you... okay, let's have a look at an email. Please, RBK *0001468. RBK *0001468, and this is an email dated 14th of June 2017, sent at what appears to be 05:16:23 from Robert Black to John Allen at RBKC, forwarding fire access plans from the refurb, and there are some attachments to it. And you can see the email below it, which is being forwarded. So it is an email from David Noble, timed at 06:14, to Janice Ray, Robert Black, and Nicola Bartholomew. Now, you're not copied in on this email, so you may not be able to help me with this, but did you know that around this time, plans, or fire access plans of the building were being sent to Mr. Black?
No, I didn't.
Can you assist us with how it was that David Noble came to send those plans? Do you know whether he was asked?
I'm sorry, I don't...
Can you assist with whether you know whether Robert Black sent these plans or gave these plans to the LFB or the LALO?
Well, it looks like that is him sending the plans to John Allen.
Yes.
But sorry, I don't know if he gave it to the LALO.
I asked you two questions. First of all, the LFB. We can see it goes to John Allen, who is of RBKC, but do you know whether he sent those plans to the LFB?
I think I've heard that he did, but I haven't... I wasn't involved in this, so I can't tell you at what stage. But no, I can't say more than that.
And the same, I imagine, would apply to my question in relation to whether or not Robert Black provided these to the LALO.
I think he did, just overhearing conversations, but I can't tell you when or what.
Right. You say you think he did overhearing conversations. Are those conversations you overheard on the night?
No, that would just be literally from evidence that I've been watching.
I'm not asking you about that.
Yeah.
Now, do you remember being shown any or seeing any floor plans for Grenfell Tower on somebody's mobile phone?
No.
Now, I'm going to ask you to look, please, next at an email at TMO 100 31176, page 9. Now, this is an email sent by Robert Black to a number of recipients. Peter Madison, Barbara Matthews, Janice Ray, and Yvonne Birch. And it's copied to you and Chamchoun. You see that?
Yes.
And the time of it is exactly 6 a.m. Subject fire. To update, Teresa and Hash that should be managing, I think, resources at the respite centres. RFM and NBP are here and making statements saying very little. And we were told yesterday that's a reference to Rock Fielding Mellon and, is it Nick Paget Brown? Mm-hmm. And then questions about the cladding and spec, questions about how it spread, and then 2 lines down from that, we need all the information about the refurbishment as this will be a primary focus, brackets Peter and his team. Do you remember receiving this email?
No, I don't.
Do you remember questions arising or being asked on the night about cladding and spec?
No, that certainly, no. It wasn't something that was discussed with me. I was, as I've said before, focusing on the things that I needed to do.
On the night, were you yourself aware of any deficiencies in the building so far as concerns fire safety?
No.
Did you, on the night, ask Janice Ray or anybody else at the TMO about whether there were any deficiencies so far as concerns fire safety?
No.
Ms. Brown, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my questions. I may need to double check to make sure I've asked all the questions I need to ask of you. But for the moment, I'm going to ask the Chairman to rise, just so that I can make that check.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we'll rise for 5 minutes, say 2:45, give us time to
Okay.
get adjusted. So you'd like to go with the ushers, they'll look after you. Thank you very much. Right, 2:45 then, please. Okay. Yes, Mr. Millett. Well, I imagine you found a few questions.
One or two,
Hold on.
but not none.
Yes, I think we've been asked to wait for 2 minutes.
Right, sure.
All right. Okay. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Ms. Brown, thank you for coming back to us. I've only got a very few questions for you. First of all, you mentioned in your evidence, I think this morning, a resident caretaker. You mentioned that there was a caretaker for Grenfell Tower. Who was that person's name? What was that person's name? Do you know?
This is the same question you've just asked me. Embarrassingly, I can't remember his name. I'm so sorry.
Right.
I should know that.
Is
It will be on record. I'm sorry.
All right. And when you say you describe it as a resident caretaker, was there actually a caretaker resident there, or they were just nearby?
No, we didn't have many resident caretakers left, so it would be just somebody who lived in the area. There were two estate services assistants who were familiar with the area.
And that's what you refer to as caretaker?
They're called as estate service assistants, but effectively they're known as caretakers.
Now, the next question it relates to keys. Did you know, from your own knowledge, that Grenfell Tower could only be accessed by somebody with a key fob?
People used key fobs there, but there would have been a drop down. There would have been an access.
Are you saying an access for the fire brigade?
Yeah, there would have been arrangements for them to get through. There would have been there's usually a drop-down key that enables people fire brigades to enter any of our buildings.
Right.
But those arrangements would have been made known to the fire brigade in terms of the familiarisation of how to get into a building.
Did you make any assumptions on the night after you were alerted to this fire about whether or not, or about how it was that the fire brigade could get into the building?
I didn't spend time thinking about it. I thought they'd get in any which way they could, given the seriousness of the situation. But I also, in the back of my mind, knew that there'd been familiarisation visits and they would know how to get into a building.
Okay. Are you aware that in the emergency plan, the TMO's own plan, there is a provision for availability of keys, and that duty estate staff would have their own keys so as to be able to access buildings?
Yeah. And they would.
Right.
Yeah.
And you say they would?
Yeah, the ESAs are on a rota and they do have keys to access buildings.
Do you happen to know which, or whether there was an ESA on site at a time earlier than you arrived?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
Do you know how long before you arrived at about because you arrived at about 3:50, how long that ESA had been there?
I have seen an email that says that one of our ESAs was on site from 2:30 with another colleague. I've seen that email. I didn't see that particular ESA on the night.
And do you remember whether that ESA had a set of keys for Grenfell Tower and could sort out any key problem that there might be?
I would imagine he did, but
Do you know?
I don't know 100%.
All right. Now, next question. You described earlier, late on this morning, just before lunch, the difficulties that you had in reading the lists of residents that came through on your phone on 2 occasions. And you also said that you'd been offered office space at St Clement's Church. Do you remember whether the office space at St Clement's Church had computer facilities?
No, we used our own laptop in that office space. The laptop that I had described earlier that Kieran Singh brought, we utilised that in the office space at St Clement's.
Did the office space have a computer you could have used?
No, I don't. Well, I didn't ever try to utilise an office space there.
I think you told us this morning that an office space was offered to you at St Clement's Church.
Yeah, but I didn't try and read any documents on that because Kieran Singh was already using the laptop to look at that data and to provide additional, to overlay the additional information that we'd got in live time across that. So I was looking at that screen with him throughout the day as we were making continual calls to people who were still missing. So I didn't seek to try and look at that on something else.
Were you offered office space at St Clement's Church prior to Kieran arriving with the laptop you then used to access that information?
No, we weren't, because at that time there was only a few of staff there, and Nicola, Bartholomew and myself were still, very much trying to get round all of the residents in there. We set up a little desk just near the entrance to make sure that people registered with us, and that was our focus at that time. So I wasn't looking at office space at that time.
Right. Ms Brown, thank you very much for those answers. You'll be glad to know I've got no further questions for you. So it remains for me only to say thank you very much to you for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add my thanks to those of Mr. Millett. It's really important that we hear from people who were there during the night in question. And it all helps us to build up the full picture. You've given your evidence over quite a long period of time, very patiently, and if I may say so, very carefully. And I'm sorry it's been a difficult experience for you, but we are very grateful to you for coming along, so thank you very much.
It's nothing to what's experienced by the residents who have lost people, so, it goes without saying that we're happy to help in any way we can.
Well, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. Right, we'd like to go with the usher. She'll look after you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr Chairman, we have one more witness this afternoon.
Yes.
Whom Mr Keating is going to call. I think we need a very short break just to rearrange the furniture, but very short.
Very well. Well, I'll rise for a minute and you come and send the usher for me when you're ready.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Keating.
Mr. Chairman, can I call Mr. Chamchoun, please?
Thank you.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, Mr. Keating.
Could you give the inquiry your full name, please?
Chamchoun.
Mr. Chamchoun, if you can invite you to keep your voice up as best you can.
Sure.
Thank you very much for attending today and accommodating us, and apologies for keeping you waiting also.
No
I know you've been
problem.
very patient as the timetable has shifted. A few words by way of introduction before we start. The focus of the questions are really on the lead up to events on the nights before 8 a.m. And I know you leave about 6 a.m. to do other work in the rest centres, so that's not going to be a difficulty. Secondly, the questions are designed to be short and simple, but if I fail on that task, please do ask me to rephrase.
Thank you.
And lastly and importantly, we are revisiting an eventful incident which can be upsetting, and if you need a break at any stage, do ask for one. That's okay. Firstly, just whereby a formality, your witness statement is going to be brought up, which is dated the 22nd of August 2018. That's TMO number 1004890. And it's also in a blue folder in front of you. Perhaps you could have a look at that once it's going to be brought up on the system, dated the 22nd of August 2018. Have you had an opportunity to read that statement?
I have, yes.
And can you confirm that that statement is true to the best of your recollection and knowledge?
Yes, to the best of my recollection.
And you have it in front of you, but also on the screen in front of you as well, there is, in fact, I don't think that's the right
No, it's
statement.
not.
It's not your signature. I think even I can identify it's not your signature. The signature in front of you of your statement, and we can check that reference in a moment, dated 22nd of August 2018. Can you confirm on the documentation before you that's your signature?
Correct, yes.
I'm just going to check that reference number. Would you mind saying that just there? Whilst we'll have the reference corrected to make sure we bring the right document so that everyone can participate. Last matter by way of introduction is, just want to deal with evidence in three broad headings, if I may. Firstly, your background experience briefly. Secondly, focusing on notification in relation to the fire and your attendance at the scene. And lastly, the focus will be on your actions on the nights before you went to the rest centre. And in terms of the reference for the statement,
Well,
it's
up.
wonderfully done. Thank you so much. It's now in front of us. And if we could just go to page 2, it shows your signature and your declaration. Okay. First heading, Mr. Chamchoun. Your position and career. In June 2007, we perhaps could go back to paragraph 1, page 1. You're head of supported housing at the TMO, isn't that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you're responsible for older people's services in sheltered housing and the care line service.
That's correct.
And how long had you been working for the TMO as of June 2017?
Since 2003.
2003. So approximately 14 years
Yes.
before June 2017. And you now have transferred those duties, you're now with ORBKC, is that correct?
I am since March of this year.
And in terms of, before asking you about the 14th of June, you mention in your statement in paragraph 3 that you cannot be precise on timings before dealing with your notification. Did you make any contemporaneous notes on the night of your actions?
No, I didn't.
And in a short period afterwards, did you make any notes after the event or log after the
No,
event?
I didn't.
No. Just to assist us, I'm sure there's probably a good reason, but is there a reason why you didn't do that?
Well, on the night I attended, I received a call and I left home with my staff ID badge and my phone and nothing else.
Nothing else. Could I ask you to look at the TMO emergency plan, which we've seen already today? That's TMO 100-13898. That's going to be brought up in a moment, but are you aware of the TMO emergency plan?
Yes, I'm aware of it.
If we just go to page 1, please, for the moment. Have you ever had to apply the TMO emergency plan?
No.
You're listed, I think, at page 19 from recollection on the cascade for
Yes.
out of hours. Is that correct?
That's
from your
correct,
recollection?
yes.
But even though you're on the cascade, it's not the case on your evidence that you've ever been called out?
I've been called out for major incidents in the past, but on both occasions they were major incidents, and the RBKC emergency plan had come into effect.
Okay. And which major incidents were they?
There was a major incident of a fire at Adair Tower when I was
Yes.
called out, and a few years back, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 10, 11 years ago, there was a gas explosion on the World's End estate.
Okay. Can I just check the acoustics, whether the voice has been amplified enough? Is everyone hearing? I wonder if we could have some assistance, just bringing forward the microphone just a little bit, just
Well,
if possible, or moved. I think yesterday we had a move to the side. Forgive me, Mr.
I'm
Chamchoun.
wondering whether the fans are causing more
little
noise
bit.
than is convenient.
You've waited this long. I think it's important we hear what you say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Can I just ask the stenographer, can you hear right?
Good. Okay. So you're on a cascade, and you've told us that you've been called out twice when it's a major emergency, and
Yes.
on those occasions the TMO emergency plan wasn't utilised because, as I understand it, the RBKC...
They were both major incidents, and the RBKC emergency plan would have come into effect.
And in relation to reverting back to the TMO emergency plan just for a moment, and you've been there for a number of years at the TMO before moving across. How regular was the training you had in relation to the emergency plan?
I didn't have any training on the emergency plan. I had a briefing, so I'm not familiar with the content of the emergency plan itself, but I am familiar with the cascade because there would have been some negotiations with the health and safety team around my involvement on the cascade.
Okay. So just to draw out a few points there, in your 14 or so years at the TMO, you had a briefing of the plan, but no training. You weren't familiar with the content of the emergency plan itself, but there had been some discussions about you being placed on the cascade.
That's correct, yes.
And you referred to the Kensington and Chelsea Contingency Management Plan, their own emergency plan. Did you have any training or knowledge of that actual plan?
I had knowledge of how to escalate the plan, but not the plan itself.
Okay. I'm going to move on now to our second heading, which is notification, when you became aware
Yes.
of the fire that night. And if we could revert back to your statement just for a moment, where it's at paragraph 3, please, just to help you to follow. And we could expand that for, I think, most of us, if that's okay. Thank you. You received a telephone call at home from Robert Black at about 1:30.
And that's correct.
And in terms of timings, is there any particular reason how that timing has stuck in your memory when making the statement about a year later?
No, when I made this statement, it was in August, and it was based on my recollection. And
Yes.
my recollection was I was called approximately around 1:30.
Thank you. And when you had received that call at 1:30 in the morning from Robert Black, what did he say to you? Can you recollect?
Yeah, he called me and he asked me if I was aware that there was a fire at Grenfell, which I wasn't. He asked me if I would be happy to go down. I live locally,
Yes.
and you heard me saying that I'd attended previous incidents in the past,
Yes.
so I had no hesitation in volunteering to go down.
Yes.
And he explained that he was making his way down, and would I mind going down in advance of him as TMO representative, which is what I did.
Yes. Was there any discussions about whether the TMO emergency plan had been activated
No.
or not? Were you aware of anything regarding whether a major incident had been called at that stage by any of the emergency services?
No. No. At that stage, I was going blind. It was only as I was making my way that that the full horror of what was unfolding that night was presented in front of me.
So you were asked to go down there to be the representative of the TMO at that stage, and he informed you he was going to make his way as well to attend.
Yes.
And am I right in understanding that it's touched upon in paragraph 9 of your statement, but prior to events of the 14th of June, you had very little knowledge about Grenfell Tower as a building? Is that
As a
correct?
building, yeah, no knowledge at all of the area. I'm very familiar with the area. And perhaps if I can just backtrack a little bit, I mean, I've lived in the area for 50-odd years. And part of that time included living on Lancaster West Estate. My parents lived there for 25 years. A significant number of my extended family, aunts, uncles, nephews, cousins, still live there and were directly impacted. And I have a number of friends who also live on the estate who were directly impacted. So just to put it into context, even if Robert hadn't have called me, I probably would have gone down as soon as I became aware that there was a fire.
Well, you mentioned the word volunteered in your statement, and that perhaps is chimes with what you're saying about why you attended.
Yes.
If you have got strong links to the community.
Of course, yes.
Yes. And also it mentions in your statement that, as I understand it, you cycled. Perhaps
I did, yes.
A reflection of your proximity
Yes.
to the location. And how long did it take you to get by bike from your home to Grenfell Tower?
Normally no more than 10 minutes, but on this particular night I cycled down Talbot Road, I crossed Portobello, and it was as I was cycling down Talbot Road at the junction of Portobello that I could see the full horror of what was happening, because Grenfell was in the skyline and the flames were climbing up the side of the building, and at that point I knew how serious an incident, that this was a major incident. I reached the junction of Ladbroke Grove. I think it was either near Blenheim Crescent or the next road, which I can't remember the name of. And I think there was an initial cordon there.
Yes.
I don't think I was...
Just pausing for a moment.
Yeah.
In terms of the cordons at that stage, you were able to get past the cordon self-evidently. Did you have any identification with you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I took my staff ID with me. My recollection is I don't think I was able to take my bike beyond the initial cordon.
Yes.
So I chained my bike up. I presented myself to one of the police officers at the cordon. I identified myself,
Yes.
showed my ID badge, and said that I needed to get to the nearest command unit.
Yes.
And it was the officer at that initial cordon who directed me to the command unit that I subsequently arrived at, which was on Beaumont Road.
Okay. So just pausing there for a moment. Phone call at 1:30 in terms of notification.
Yeah.
And after that phone call, how long did it take you approximately to leave the house?
I was in bed, so it took me about 10 minutes to sling something on,
Sure.
make sure I had my phone, make sure I had my house keys, and make sure I had my staff ID badge.
So 10, perhaps 15 minutes to departure, 1:45 approximately.
Yes.
And how long did it take you? You say it would normally take 10 minutes, but there was these delays as you
There
made
were
your way.
these delays, yes. So it probably took me 5, 6, 7 minutes to get to Ladbroke Grove. I then had to engage with the police officers at the cordon, and at that point I was then on foot.
Yes.
So I realised, I was made aware that I needed to make my way to the vicinity of the sports centre, which I did. I don't remember which road I went down, but I ended up on Clarendon Road,
Yes.
and there's a short passage on the estate there that cuts through to the back of the sports centre, and it links you to Walmer Road and Beaumont Road. When I arrived at Walmer Road, there was a second police cordon, and again I strolled up to the police officer there, showed my ID badge and informed him of who I was and why I was there. And again, this is just based on my recollection. I think one of the officers actually then walked me down to the command unit.
So from your departure from your home at approximately 1:45 and getting through the cordons as you described it, how long do you think?
I'd say about 20, anything between 20 to 30 minutes, yeah, by the time I managed to navigate my way through.
Around 2:15 if we
Yes.
break it down the way you have. You mentioned you used your ID card, your TMO identification.
Yes.
Did you have anything else visible, such as a tabard or a jacket?
No, I literally slung on the nearest items of clothing that I could find because I was in bed, obviously, when I was contacted. And my recollection, I think it was a warm summer evening. I think I put a pair of jeans on and a T-shirt, and I had my phone and my ID badge with me.
And on the way, when you, as the scale of what was occurring became apparent to you, did you call anybody else from the TMO on your way to Grenfell Tower?
No, not on the way, but when I arrived, I did.
On the scene, approximately 2:15, your statement, you mention, I'm just going to look for the reference now, that at paragraph 5, you would say I arrived at a command unit at about 2 a.m. or shortly after.
Yeah.
So approximately
Yes.
consistent with what you said.
Yeah, I'm just
Never.
approximating.
Yes.
Yeah, but based on my recollection, that sounds about correct.
And by the time you got to the command unit, you mentioned that you were accompanied to the command unit.
Yes.
Did you see anybody from the local authority there at that point?
Not at that point. The first thing that I did was I knocked on the door of the porter cabin.
Yes.
And my recollection is I think I went in because I remember seeing 3, possibly 4 LFB officers in there. Again, I showed my card.
Yes.
I identified who I was and I explained that the chief executive and other members of the TMO were on their way and that I was there on behalf of the TMO.
And what did they say to you after you explained who you were and who was coming from the TMO?
One of the officers informed me that the LALO officers were on site and were around in the vicinity.
Sure.
Okay. And I made it known that I was there to help. And so if there was anything that they needed, I would be available. And I explained that I would wait outside, in the vicinity of the porter cabin. And if they needed anything, they could come and call me.
Okay.
Okay.
And was there any request at that point direct to you when you arrived and offered your assistance?
No, understandably so. I mean, we're talking about the first hour, a couple of hours of the fire.
Yes.
The fire had taken significant hold of the tower block. I think the best way to describe it is as horrific chaos. I mean, there were a number of emergency services around, police, paramedics, LFB, moving backwards and forwards. I mean, it was a truly frightening sight. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in my life.
Yes. And within that chaos, horrific chaos you described, you were there at 2:15, you've spoken and made yourself known at the command unit.
Yes.
You've been told that there's a LALO on site.
Mm-hmm.
When was the first time you saw the LALO?
Again, I can't be sure of the exact times, but it was once I placed myself outside of the command unit, someone came and presented himself as a LALO officer to me. Now, I'm not sure if he'd been informed that someone from the TMO was there, but he came and presented himself. I again confirmed who I was. I explained that I had been called by my chief executive and that the chief executive was on his way. And obviously I was there to assist in any way that I could.
We know there's footage which the inquiry saw yesterday and indeed before then of Nick Layton, the first LALO on the scene. Do you recall speaking to Nick Layton?
I think Nick was the first person that I made contact with. I believe at some stage I did subsequently speak to Mike Rumberley.
That's correct.
Yeah, as well. But the first LALO officer that I came into contact with would have been Nick.
The footage has him arriving at 02:47 approximately.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
that's his arrival,
Okay.
which was, I believe, shown yesterday.
Right. Okay.
do you think that you were there before or after his arrival at 0247 on the scene?
Well, he wasn't on the scene when I arrived.
No.
Okay, but I was definitely informed by the LFD officers that the LALO officers were on site.
Okay.
Okay. Which again may be a reflection of my own recollection of the timings.
Yes, well, you're doing the best you can from your recollection, and I wanted to move on to the point, perhaps when you first met Mr. Nick Layton, which was probably some time after 0247, that's when he arrived. There was a period of time when only him and you were outside. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you give us any estimate of the duration for how long the two of you were the sole representatives of the TMO and ORBKC?
I think my conversation with Nick was literally a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, and then he disappeared. Again, I can't be 100% sure, but he disappeared. The command unit was located on Bowmore Road, and there's a passage that goes directly in front of the sports centre. And to the best of my recollection, he went in that direction after I'd introduced myself and let him know that I was available to assist.
Yes. And in that sort of initial introductory period when you spoke to him for up to 2 or 3 minutes, what was discussed?
I introduced myself.
Yes.
Yeah, I said who I was. I explained that I was the head of supported housing.
Yes.
That I'd been contacted by the chief executive because to inform me that there was a fire, and that I'd volunteered to come down in advance of other staff from the TMO, the chief executive and other staff from the TMO who were on their way.
In essence, pretty much what you've said
Yeah.
to us already. And was anything from Mr. Layton at that stage as a LALO, any requests
At
from
that
him
stage,
to
no.
you?
No.
I want to deal with the arrival of the next TMO representative. Yes, which I'm just going to deal with now, which is Mr. Black.
Yes.
Can you assist with what time he arrived at?
Again, to the best of my recollection, I think it was between 3 and 3:30.
Perhaps we could bring up paragraph 8 of your statement, which is in front of you at the first page. Paragraph 8, please. Page 1. And you mentioned there that Robert Black arrived sometime later at about 3:30. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right, yes. Yeah.
And then you mentioned Teresa Brown shortly after that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
at that time, around about 3:30, to use the phraseology in your statement, did you have an initial discussion with Mr. Black at that point?
Yes. I did call him when I arrived at the command unit to say, Robert, I'm on site, and this is where I'm located, because
Yes.
I knew he was travelling down, so I needed to give him directions as to where to go. And I think when he arrived, I think he actually called me because he wasn't sure exactly how to get there. And again, to the best of my recollection, I think he ended up at the cordon in Walmer Road. And my recollection is I actually went up to the cordon and walked him down to the command unit.
So by this stage, it's 3:30. Mr. Black is there on behalf of the TMO. You are there.
Yes.
Before Teresa Brown arrives. Was there any discussions about what you, on behalf of the TMO, were there to do?
No, I gave Robert an update,
Yes.
which was to confirm that I'd introduced myself to the LFB command unit and that I'd met the LALO officer. And the LALO officer wasn't around at that stage, but I believe he turned up sometime after, and I think I introduced him to Robert, and then he and Robert had a discussion.
And did you hear what that discussion was?
No.
No. And we know Miss Brown attends reasonably shortly thereafter.
Yeah, before Teresa attended, Councillor Field and Mellon had also shown up, so he was with Robert when he turned up. Yeah.
Any estimation as to when that councillor attended?
It would have been between Robert's arrival and Teresa's arrival, but any time I give you would be, pure guessing on my part.
Okay. And in relation to arrival at Teresa Brown, do you have an independent recollection of her arrival?
Again, just to try to pinpoint it in relationship to when Robert arrived, I would say it was probably about 20 to 30 minutes after.
Probably sometime before 4, would that be
Yes.
fair? So at the time where you have yourself, Mr. Black, and Miss Brown outside the command unit, what was the position then? Was there a plan of action discussed?
During the period I was waiting, I was trying to garner as much information as I could. And again, I don't remember which LALO officer, but I was made aware at that stage that some ad hoc rest centres had been opened up in the
Yes.
vicinity. And the ones that came to mind at that particular moment were the rest centre at St Clement's. I was also made aware that there was a rest centre at a nearby pub in Shepherd's Bush, which I knew the location of. And I think I was made aware that there was a potential rest centre on the other side of the sports centre at the Lancaster West Methodist Church.
So at this stage, discussions with the other LALO, I think you mentioned,
LALO,
that's
yeah.
Mike Rumble.
Yeah. Again, I can't be sure if it was Nick or Mike,
Okay.
but that information would have come to me through the LALO officers.
So information at this stage on your account is really more about these rest centres which
Yes,
have
yes.
been set up
Yes,
in the
yeah.
locality.
Yes, and in the context of my role, when I volunteered, that's what I was anticipating would be my role, would be to assist with the survivors and the evacuees and any rest centres that would be set up that day.
And in terms of communications with LALO, you've obviously had face-to-face conversations.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did there come a time where you were provided with a radio by one of the LALOs? Do you recall that?
I may well have been, but I'll be entirely honest with you, I have no recollection of being provided with a radio or using a radio.
Yes. I think Mr. Rumble has said that he provided you with a radio
Yeah.
to assist with communication.
Yeah.
Does that assist your recollection now?
Not really, no. I mean, I can't dispute his statement. It may well have happened, but that would then sort of beg the question of what did I do with the radio? I certainly didn't have it with me for the remainder of the day, once we were at the rest centres.
You mentioned what you anticipated your role was going to be. Was there any discussions or directions from anybody else as to what your role was?
Sorry to reiterate what I said
No.
earlier, but it was absolute carnage. The emergency services clearly had their hands full at the time.
Yes.
And it looked to me like the LALO officers had their hands full at the time. So I was really just trying to glean as much information as I could before my colleagues arrived. I became aware, obviously, that there were some rest centres being set up.
Yes.
But at that point, I was the sole TMO representative, so there was no sense in me trying to get to any of those rest centres. I had to wait, for want of a better word, for reinforcements
Yes.
until we had enough bodies on the ground to disperse across the rest centres.
So just drawing that together, it's coming up to 4 o'clock. Miss Brown has arrived. And shortly after she arrived, did other members of staff arrive from the TMO?
Yes, I gave Teresa a handover of the information I had, specifically around the location of the rest centres. I do recall that Teresa made me aware that Mandy Warrior, Nicola Bartholomew, Kieran Singh, I think Angelique Noble and Maria Sharples were on their way. I remember there was some discussion that Maria was going to try to gain access via Shepherd's Bush. So I contacted Maria. I phoned Maria and asked her if she... I explained to her that we'd been informed that there was a rest centre at Belushi's pub, and would she mind popping in to see what the state of play was,
Yes.
how many survivors or how many evacuees were at that rest centre.
Which is a rest centre which really didn't take off in the end due to its distance.
No, and I don't again, I don't recall if Maria called me back directly or whether she fed through Teresa, but I subsequently found out that Maria did go to the pub and there was no one there.
Was there an occasion where once Angelique Noble and Manly Warrior attended within the cordon that you then left with them?
Yes, once we had enough bodies on the ground, we gathered together to agree where we were going to deploy our resources. In terms of where I went, my recollection is I went with Angelique, and at that point we were made aware that there was a rest centre at Latimer. And again, because of my familiarity with the local area, in the context of the other rest centres that were being opened up, Latimer was probably the furthest away because it's near the Westway Sports Centre on Bramley Road. So I offered to go there with Angelique because Angelique didn't know exactly where it was.
And the arrival of Teresa coming up to 4 o'clock, how soon after can you recollect you left the vicinity of the command unit and went to Latimer?
It's very, very difficult to recollect exact times.
If it assists you, and forgive me if I'm speaking across you,
yes.
At paragraph 10 you say, I left the command unit before 6 a.m. To go to the rest centres to assist with recording of people arriving there. It perhaps is open to interpretation. It doesn't mean at 6 a.m.
Absolutely, yeah, yes. And that was deliberate because I knew it was before 6 a.m. but I couldn't be any more specific than that. Again, my best guess would be sometime between 5 and 6.
Yes. I think perhaps the gist of Teresa Brown's evidence would be earlier in that time period rather than later in that time period. Does that assist your recollection?
Not really.
No. Just focusing for a moment, I'm not going to ask you at this stage in relation to rest centres and what you did. That doesn't form part of this part of the inquiry. But I wanted to ask you questions about that time where you were outside the command unit when you arrived to the time you went to the rest centres. Did you recall receiving or hearing any requests in relation to details of residence from the LALO or the LFB?
No. I didn't receive any requests personally, and I wasn't aware of any requests.
And the same question, did you receive or did you hear anyone else receive any requests for plans of the building or of any of that like at all? And during that time period when you were outside the command unit, were you yourself aware of any deficiencies in the building at Grenville so far as concerns as to fire safety?
No.
And again, the same question, slightly different way. Did you hear anyone else from the TMO discuss whether there's any deficiencies as to fire safety?
On the night itself, no.
No. Okay. Mr. Chamchoun, I'm coming to the end of the questions I have. What I'm going to ask, Mr. Chairman, is just for a brief, perhaps 5 minutes.
Chance to check your notes.
Yeah, check my notes and really to give the opportunity if there's any further follow-up questions.
Well, Mr. Chamchoun, we'll have a short break. Council need an opportunity just to make sure they've covered everything. So I think for convenience I'll say 20 to 4. And I should ask you please not to talk about your evidence while you're out of the room. If you go with the usher, she'll look after you. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, 20 to 4 then, please. Yes, Mr. Keating, well, I imagine you found some
Well,
questions.
we aim not to disappoint. Mr.
course.
Chairman, there's 2 more questions.
Right. Would
But
you ask,
it'll be less than 5 minutes.
that's right. Would you ask the witness to come back, please? All right, Mr. Chamchoun?
Yes.
I think council has found a couple of questions.
Yes.
Yes.
Not to detain you much longer, thank you very much for attending. Just 2 discrete topics, if I may deal with. Could we bring up your statement, if that's possible, please, in paragraph 12, which is the last paragraph of your statement at page 2, please. And whilst that's been brought up, I'm just going to read it out. It says, you made and received several telephone calls throughout my time on site, and mostly with TMO staff. I did not keep a record of these calls, which are too numerous to identify.
Mm-hmm.
And in relation to the latter part, we've covered that already, haven't we? In relation to those telephone calls, were you using your own personal mobile or was it a work mobile?
My personal and work mobile, I wanted to say.
At the same time?
No, I have one phone which doubles up as personal and
Forgive
work.
me, I misheard. In terms of the bills for those phones,
Mm-hmm.
do you still, that phone, forgive me, singular, do you still have access to that bill?
I'm sure they're available online. I don't receive paper bills, but all the bills would be on my online account.
Did you check your phone when you were trying to check times or arrival times of other people when you
No,
were?
I didn't.
In relation to that billing, would that be something that you'd be willing to disclose to the inquiry if need be?
Of course, yes.
Thank you. Call records, yes. And when I say billing, I'm referring to the call records, but you refer to a number of times having phone contact with people just as they arrive or just before they arrive.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. Second point really is mentioning the topic where Mr. Black arrives, and you mentioned that he was with a counsellor when he arrived.
I think Robert arrived first and then counsellor arrived maybe 5-10 minutes later.
That's the question I wanted to clarify as to the order. And could you tell us again the name of that counsellor?
I believe it was Councillor Field and Mellon.
And when he arrived after Robert Black 10 minutes or so later, did you see what they were doing, Mr. Black and that counsellor?
To be honest, I have a recollection of the 2 of them chatting together slightly away from the command unit, but what the content of that discussion was, I couldn't tell you.
And in terms of the duration of that conversation?
Again, I have no recollection.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you so much again for attending
Thank you.
today. It's very much appreciated.
Yes, and I'd add my thanks, Mr. Chamchoun. Can I just ask you, have you been waiting all day to give your evidence here?
I'm happy to have been of help, if I have been of help.
Well, you have, and it's very good of you, but I'm sorry we did keep you waiting around for so long. It's difficult to avoid that to some extent, but anyway.
It's a horrendous tragedy, and I think there were a lot of people impacted on that day.
Yeah.
And my thoughts remain with the survivors and everyone that was affected.
Well, we are very grateful to you for coming to tell us what you can about what was going on. It all adds to the big picture.
Thank you.
And so thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
All right, well now you're free to go. Would you like to go with the usher?
Yes. Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your patience today and for sitting so late. And that's all the business that there is for today.
Right, thank you very much. And then we're going to start on Monday, I think. Maybe Mr.
Millett will probably know better now.
Probably have a good idea as anyone.
I hope so, yes. We're going to start on Monday with the evidence of Control Room Officer Sarah Russell,
Right.
who is an LFB Control Room Officer. We will then proceed to hear evidence from other control room staff from non-London control rooms who will be able to assist with some details about buddy control rooms and things of that nature.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, we'll break there and resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning then, please. Thank you very much.